Hello, Uwe here with a brief video about the check spring that is on the tension unit here. This is a Singer 111-151. The tension unit for the upper thread is very similar to many other sewing machines. For 2-needle sewing machines, you will just have a second one of these thread tension units, and these discs here will be doubled up to have two paths, but the basics are the same. The purpose of this check spring is to keep the thread taut while the needle is above the material, to keep the thread from getting tangled up with the needle as it goes back down. You can adjust the resting point of this check spring here. Ideally, it should start resting on this point here as soon as the needle enters the material, because then it no longer needs to be held taut, because the needle can no longer get tangled up with the thread. You can adjust the resting point by loosening this screw here and moving this little semicircular part around. And it may depend on the material thickness that you sew. Quite often you don't have to adjust this, but this is how you adjust the resting point. The tension of the spring is where a lot of people get confused about. These screws here look nearly identical. This is the tension thumb nut for the actual thread tension. If you turn this, it will increase the tension. This nut looks identical, but this works totally differently. This nut really is there to keep the check spring wrapped around this post and to make sure it doesn't pop off. Sometimes the check spring itself can get caught between the raised portion here and the thumb nut as you tighten it down. So if this check spring gets caught between the thumb nut and the back part, it can no longer move freely. When you tighten this, you have to make sure this check spring moves freely still. If not, loosen this, wiggle it, and then tighten it again until this moves freely. To adjust the tension of the actual check spring, you have to do two things. Let me just take this nut off again so you can see it a little better. I have a new unit that is nearly identical to what I have on the machine. You can see how the spring continues behind around this post, and as you twist it, this is what provides the tension. This part here is held in place inside the machine by a lock screw down here. In order to change the tension of this check spring, you have to rotate this post. However, do not rotate this post or attempt to before you have loosened the set screw. If you try to turn this while this is set, things are just going to get messed up or may break. So I'm going to loosen this screw here. And after I've loosened it, this post here will be able to turn freely. As I turn it upwards, you can see that the spring moves with it. There's no tension on the spring at all right now. As I turn it counterclockwise, the tension of the spring increases. When you have it at a point where it feels like a reasonable tension, or increase or decrease from the current level, hold it in place with the top screw and then tighten this lock screw down here again. And then you can put this thumb nut back in place, and you have changed the tension of the check spring. And that is how that part works. Hopefully this clarifies a few points. A lot of people do get confused about these identical looking things that work totally differently. So hope this helps. Enjoy. Happy sewing.